Welcome back to The Thoughtful Therapist. I am Dr. Jimmy Slaughter. Now, before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that I have not made an episode in a few weeks. A lot of that's just because life has been lifing lately. And honestly, I wasn't sure if this was the episode I was going to come back with. But the more I kind of sat with the idea of the episode, the more I felt like maybe it was the right one. So here we go. Episode 8. The baggage we didn't choose. So forgiveness is one of those ideas that seems really easy to talk about. I mean, it's used all the time. And when we talk about it, it almost seems theoretical, but it changes. It becomes really different when life actually puts that experience or opportunity of forgiveness right in front of you. And I'm still kind of trying to figure out how to understand it myself. So I was hoping we could think it through together. So let's take it one thought at a time. I'm going to start this episode with a reflective question. I'm going to ask you guys, take a minute and ask yourself, what is forgiveness? Like, how would you describe it? What does it mean? What does it look like? How do you know you've forgiven someone? How do you know they've forgiven you? I know it's really hard. Don't beat yourself up too much if you struggle answering this one. This is a much more difficult question than most people think. And it is a very nuanced topic. And it's one I've been trying to understand as a counselor for a very long time. I think to myself a lot, and it's not just with this word, but this is this episode. So how can a word as ubiquitous or as well used as forgiveness, it's one that we use so frequently, be so difficult to understand? Curious, right? So I invite you to walk through this idea with me as I attempt to unpack forgiveness in the best way that I have come to understand it. So let's start with a hypothetical scenario. Let's say that you have a guy named Tommy. He's a high school student in a relationship with a girl we'll call Jane. The feelings are fresh, they're new, and they're scary, but he trusts her with all of her heart. Right? First love, budding love. But then Jane cheats on him with his childhood best friend. We'll call him Wyatt. So the pain is immense. And it's so great that Tommy decides he will never forgive either of them. So what do you think that looks like in 10 years? We'll say Tommy's 27 now. He was 17, but let's say now he's 27. How do you think that choice to withhold forgiveness from them has impacted his life? His ability to trust others, his relationships? With that question, it's easy to imagine him carrying loneliness, distrust, jealousy, and a fear of commitment. The actions from those two people from his past have now had a lasting and very powerful negative impact in his life. So here's the interesting question. Do you think Jane or Wyatt 10 years later ever really think about Tommy anymore? Do you think they lose sleep over what they did? I don't think so. So the question then becomes, why would Tommy keep carrying the weight of these other people's choices so long after the deed was done? Why allow this negative experience to continue dictating the direction of his life? Now, I know that that's really simplified, but it is a good showcase of kind of what I'm getting at with this. So this led me to my first real thought on this idea of forgiveness. It's for us, like period, full stop. It's the decision to not let someone else's choices control the direction of my life. Now, this choice, and I say it's a choice, but that's not really true. But this idea of withholding forgiveness is kind of what we colloquially call baggage. It's lugging these heavy bricks made from other people's poor choices on our backs, and we're like holding on to them for dear life. And it's such an interesting choice. I'm not saying it's a wrong choice, it's just an interesting one. So I don't know, maybe forgiveness is something like reclaiming agency, meaning the ability to make decisions and act as an independent person within this world. So it's interesting, this topic of forgiveness. This is one that comes up in almost every session of counseling I've ever had. How do I forgive them? Should I? And it's interesting, right? Because I feel like a lot of times we get bogged down in like trying to describe what it is. What is forgiveness? I asked you that at the beginning of this episode, after all. But it's funny because in my experience, sometimes defining what forgiveness is not is even more useful. Because defining what it's not kind of gets rid of all of the, I'm not going to call them games, but we'll say the ways in which we try to control our narrative through not forgiving people. So what is forgiveness not then? First off, forgiveness is not saying that what happened was okay. It wasn't. But that's a game we play a lot, right? Like if I say that it's okay, then maybe they'll think they can do it again. And that's really scary because we really don't want it to happen again. But I'm not sure that forgiveness is suggesting that it was. Next, forgiveness is not saying that we are now okay, that the relationship is okay, that things will just go back to the way that they were. It's important to remember we can forgive someone and still decide that that relationship cannot continue, or at least cannot continue in the same way. You can love someone from afar, but forgiveness does not obligate reconciliation, continued access, emotional availability. That's not really how it works. Next, I said this earlier, but forgiveness is not for them. While others might benefit from us forgiving them, it has almost nothing to do with them. It's not something you owe. It's not a prize that they can earn. It's not how it goes. Forgiveness is not a weapon. Man, the amount of people I sit across from, and I've probably done this myself, to be honest, and I've just tried to see people try to withhold forgiveness as like a punishment, or like I'm gonna see how many hoops that they're willing to jump through, or how much fire they're willing to stand in for me to prove that this was a mistake or that they won't do it ever again. Right? It's that control piece, but it almost always backfires. Because it's interesting, actually, when we try to use forgiveness as a weapon, we end up doing stuff that we now need to ask that person for forgiveness for. And it turns into this like unattainable loop that you just can't really get out of. It's messy. And by the time you're willing to forgive them, it's normally something like, okay, I've made you suffer enough. And that doesn't really leave you in a good place, especially with yourself. Forgiveness is not a moral obligation or a requirement, as I said earlier. Meaning, like, it's not proof that you're good that you can forgive. And withholding forgiveness is not proof that you're bad. The only really moral piece, I think, belongs to the choice that caused the pain. I think that's the only actual moral thing that happened here. Because I don't know, forgiveness seems almost like it's like a potential for peace that belongs in the person that has to live with the aftermath of the other person's choice, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. So this part in the episode, I really want to acknowledge something important. There are definitely people listening who have experienced harms that are far greater than the example that I used today. Abuse, violence, profound betrayals, the kinds of wounds that don't fit neatly into a podcast episode like this one. And I'm not suggesting that forgiveness is simple. It is not. And I'm certainly not suggesting that anyone owes it to another person. I'm simply exploring the possibility that carrying the pain forever might not be the only option available to us. And whether or not that forgiveness comes in a year, 10 years, or never at all, the choice belongs to the person carrying the burden. Don't forget this because it's important. Maybe the mistrust brought on by trauma from other people's actions serves you for a time. Maybe it even keeps you safe for a little bit. Sure. But there's a cost to it. And for how long? Now, I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from the time that's literally needed sometimes for this process. I'm just trying to promote a simple idea that maybe we need to be actively taking note of this process so that we don't become stuck. Because you don't deserve to be. It's funny at the end of the day because I think that the hardest person of all to forgive is probably ourselves. And I've been trying to figure that out forever. It's really complicated. And I think it goes something like this. With other people, and not always, but we can often extend them some level of grace. We can, I don't know, maybe assume some level of ignorance, or maybe they were scared, or maybe it was just a moral failing this one time, or just a flaw in their character. But when it comes to ourselves, there's no distance, there's no space. We feel like, well, we know exactly what we did. And we probably have a pretty good idea of why we did it. Because we were kind of there for every thought, every choice, every rationalization that allowed us to do that thing. There's no wiggle room. There's no comfortable story to hide behind. Even if we try to tell other people a comfortable story. And we just kind of know it wasn't okay. And so we conclude that maybe we aren't okay. We turn all of those things that I just spoke about, that forgiveness is not meant to be, inward. We use it as a weapon against ourselves. We withhold it as a punishment. We treat it like a moral debt that we can never hope to repay. And we carry that baggage the heaviest of all. And this is where it gets especially tricky. Because there is an important difference between guilt and shame when it comes to needing to forgive yourself. Because guilt is something like, I did something bad. It's painful, but it almost kind of tries to motivate you to make amends or be better. Right? Like, I'm not going to do that again. Whereas shame says something closer to like, I'm just bad. And once shame really takes a hold of you, forgiveness becomes really hard, almost impossible. And what happens after that? We become more likely to make further mistakes. We become less kind and compassionate with ourselves, and often we become harsher with others too, to be honest. And this shame becomes the foundation for a nasty negative cognition, like we talked about in the last episode. We take the one action we're struggling to forgive and use it as a proof. See, this is who I really am. And it's interesting. So I'm not going to go down this like big lecture with you with this, but neuroscience is actually starting to study some of the things about forgiveness now. And it's kind of showing us that a lot of the things that we have felt intuitively, or maybe even philosophically, are actually kind of true. So when we're shameful, or when we're having a really hard time after a tragedy or a trauma, we stay stuck in this level of resentment or shame And then the brain's alarm system stays activated constantly, right? We become hypervigilant, and trauma can make this even more persistent. It can make it almost true on a genetic level. But as we slowly learn how to forgive, and I don't mean forced forgiveness because it really and truthfully doesn't work, but like real forgiveness, it seems to help quiet a lot of those side effects. We become less hypervigilant, we become calmer, more peaceful, and it's like a real physiological thing that happens to us, which is really cool. I'm not going to say it makes everything better or that's easy, because it's not, but it kind of allows us to process the trauma in a new way through a new lens that doesn't have the same physiological effect, if that makes sense. It doesn't erase what happened, but it might just begin to loosen trauma's grip on your mind and your body, which is really cool. And so for me, maybe this is where compassion belongs. Because people don't hold on to pain because they're weak. We don't not forgive because we're weak. Most of the time we hold on to it, I think, because something really important happened. Because you experienced real pain. And maybe not forgiving once kept you safe. But sometimes that injury becomes part of our identity. And after enough years of harboring that, letting go of it can feel strangely uncomfortable. Right? And it's really weird, actually. It's like, who am I without this pain that I've carried for so long? It's almost like we'll miss it. I wonder if this is one of the reasons that forgiveness can feel so frightening. Not because we want to suffer, but because we aren't really sure who we become if the suffering is no longer carrying such a big part of our story. And yet, sometimes people find that simply moving forward in spite of what's happened starts to shift something. As agency slowly returns, or your ability to make the choices for your own self and your own life, forgiveness can kind of actually start to begin naturally, almost on its own. Instead of, they made me sad or scared, the story can almost turn on its head and become like, they helped me to get to a point to become the strong person that I am now. And I'm not saying the pain disappears. I'm just saying that the pain itself kind of stops being like the main storyline of your character, if that makes any sense. So if and when forgiveness is eventually possible, I don't think it begins with any sort of judgment on any party. I think it begins maybe with understanding. And maybe that's why I've wrestled with this topic for so long. Because there are certainly still people in my own life that I'm struggling to forgive. But by most outward measures, meaning like what you can see, I've already moved on. But if I'm being honest, my heart isn't always there yet. And I think that's okay. There's not like a dramatic switch that happens when you forgive someone. It often feels more like a path, a direction, not so much a destination, like something we're actively moving towards, or maybe even something we're practicing or just trying to understand. And you'd be surprised, because sometimes it can look as simple as just not assuming anymore that every person that I meet is going to hurt us in the same way as the other one. Maybe just a little bit more open, a little more willing to trust, a little more willing to risk, be vulnerable. I don't know. Maybe that's the step towards what freedom looks like. I don't know. Not in like an absence of scars, but the ability to move forward without constantly consulting our wounds. So I'll finish with this. There really is no time limit on forgiveness. Forcing it can cause its own damage. But when the time comes, when those events that happen to you have properly been processed or understood, maybe it's important to trying to forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because you do, not because you want that relationship back, but because carrying this baggage forever is not fair, especially when you didn't choose to pick it up in the first place. There's a real dignity to this idea. I read a philosophy paper once, years ago now, and it carried this sentence, and I actually kind of hate it, if I'm honest. And the sentence was, forgiveness is the most selfish thing a person can do. God, I still wrestle with that. But I'm not sure it's wrong. Can't think of the way that it is anyway. Because at the end of the day, forgiving won't better their lives, it'll better yours. And that's where I'm thinking about it for now. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I really want to be able to use this space to learn from one another. Maybe I'm not thinking about it right. I would love to learn how to think of it differently. Thanks for thinking this through with me. The Thoughtful Therapist. A quick shout out to Synergy Health Group. Thank you guys for all of your compassion and support through this project. If you guys need someone to talk to in Florida, Synergy Health Group. There you guys.